My name is Marcus Reed, and the strangest day of my life started because I got tired of buffering videos. 3 police officers would eventually end up involved, my neighbor would realize she'd accused the wrong person, and someone in our neighborhood would leave in handcuffs. But at 2 o'clock that Thursday afternoon, all I wanted was faster internet. I was living in a quiet subdivision outside St. Louis back then, the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened, and people somehow treated that as a challenge. Most of my neighbors were decent folks, but they loved knowing what everyone else was doing. Me, I preferred keeping to myself. I worked remotely as a software consultant, spent my days on conference calls, and honestly didn't have much energy left for block parties, neighborhood gossip, or standing around discussing lawn fertilizer for 45 minutes. Apparently, that made me suspicious. Across the street lived Carol Whitaker, a woman who always seemed to know everybody's business before they did. If a teenager came home after curfew, Carol knew. If someone bought new patio furniture, Carol knew. If a couple argued with their garage door open for 30 seconds, Carol could probably provide a detailed transcript by lunchtime. We had never actually argued, but I could tell she didn't quite trust me. Maybe because I wasn't social enough. Maybe because I worked from home. Maybe because some people get uncomfortable around anyone they can't immediately figure out. Whatever the reason, I could always feel her watching whenever I walked outside. Usually I ignored it. Then my internet started acting weird. At first it was little things. Video calls freezing. Music stopping halfway through songs. Files taking forever to upload. I blamed my provider like everybody does. But after 2 weeks of constant problems, I finally decided to investigate. I logged into my router, pulled up the device list, and immediately noticed something strange. There was a connection I didn't recognize. Not some random manufacturer code. Not a smart appliance. Somebody had actually named it. Riverbend01. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. I lived alone. Every device connected to my network should have been familiar. My laptop. My phone. My television. A printer I barely used. That was it. Riverbend01 definitely wasn't mine. Curious now, I opened the activity logs. The device had been connected almost constantly, day and night. It was moving enough data to explain every problem I'd been having. Somebody wasn't just borrowing my Wi-Fi. They were living on it. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. Somewhere nearby, some genius had decided my internet bill was a community resource. Well, that was about to end. I disconnected every unknown device and began changing passwords. Since my signal was stronger outside near the driveway, I stepped out with my phone and started updating security settings. Nothing dramatic. Just me standing there in an old Cardinals t-shirt, tapping through menus and occasionally muttering things about technology that probably shouldn't be repeated in polite company. Unfortunately, that happened to be the exact moment Carol looked out her kitchen window. I didn't know it then, but she spent several minutes watching me. From her perspective, I guess I looked strange. I kept glancing at my screen. I occasionally looked around while checking connection strength. Once or twice I walked a few feet one direction and then another. To a normal person, it looked like someone troubleshooting a network. To Carol, apparently, it looked like the opening scene of a crime documentary. While I was busy securing my Wi-Fi, she was inside calling 911. Later, one of the officers told me parts of the conversation. The dispatcher kept asking what crime was actually being committed. Carol didn't have an answer. She couldn't say I'd threatened anyone. She couldn't say I'd damaged property. She couldn't even explain what I was supposedly doing. She just kept repeating the same thing. Something isn't right. I know it. Looking back, that's probably the most dangerous sentence in the world. Not because people are always wrong when they trust their instincts, but because sometimes they stop looking for evidence once they've already decided how the story ends. About 15 minutes later, I heard sirens. At first I ignored them. Then I realized they were slowing down. Then I realized they were stopping, right in front of my house. I remember lowering my phone and watching a patrol SUV pull against the curb. 2 officers stepped out and started walking toward me. One was tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of face that never smiled unless absolutely necessary. The other looked younger but carried herself with the same calm confidence. And standing behind them on her porch, arms crossed like she'd personally cracked a major criminal case, was Carol Whitaker. The moment I saw her, I knew exactly who had called. What I didn't understand was why. The taller officer stopped a few feet away and asked what I was doing. Changing my Wi-Fi password, I said. He blinked. I blinked. For a second, nobody said anything. Then Carol shouted from across the street, "That's what he wants you to think." Even now, years later, I still remember the look on that officer's face. It was the expression of a man realizing his afternoon had just become significantly more complicated. What none of us knew in that moment was that the device hidden inside my network wasn't just stealing internet access. It was connected to something far darker, and within the next hour those officers would discover evidence that someone had been secretly watching families throughout our entire neighborhood for months. The officer introduced himself as Sergeant Ethan Brooks, and after a few awkward seconds he asked if I'd mind showing him the router settings that had me standing in the driveway in the first place. Honestly, I should have told him no. I hadn't broken any laws, and changing a password on my own network wasn't exactly probable cause. But I could already see where this was headed. If I refused, Carol would take it as proof that I was hiding something. If I cooperated, maybe everybody could get on with their day. So I unlocked my phone and pulled up the device list. "See this?" I said, pointing at the unfamiliar connection. "That's why I'm out here. Somebody's been on my network." Sergeant Brooks leaned closer. His partner, Officer Jenna Mills, stepped beside him. For the first time since they'd arrived, both officers looked genuinely interested. "You don't recognize that device?" Jenna asked. "Never seen it before," I said. "And judging by the traffic logs, it's been here a while." Carol was still listening from her porch. "Or maybe that's something he made up," she called out. Sergeant Brooks didn't even turn around. "Ma'am, please let us handle this." That was probably the first moment Carol realized the conversation was no longer going the way she'd expected. Brooks asked if he could see the activity logs. I opened them and handed him the phone. At first he was just scrolling casually. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. His eyebrows pulled together. His posture stiffened. The relaxed neighborhood dispute attitude disappeared. "What exactly is this traffic?" he asked. I took the phone back and looked closer. A few seconds later, I felt my stomach tighten. "That's weird." "What?" Jenna asked. I zoomed in on the records. "These aren't normal downloads." Meaning whatever this device is doing, it's accessing camera feeds. The air seemed to stop moving. Even Carol went quiet. Brooks looked at me carefully. "Your cameras?" I nodded slowly. "Looks like it. I had a small home security system. Nothing fancy. A few exterior cameras, a doorbell camera, and cloud storage. Like most people, I'd installed them and mostly forgotten they existed. The idea that somebody might have been watching them made my skin crawl. But what happened next was even worse. I opened another log file. Then another. The more I dug, the more confused I became. "No," I whispered. Jenna looked over my shoulder. "What is it?" I swallowed hard. "It's not just my cameras." Suddenly, everyone was paying attention. The logs showed multiple external connections, multiple authentication requests, multiple video streams, different addresses, different homes, different systems. Whoever had connected to my network wasn't simply snooping on me. They were accessing cameras all over the neighborhood. "That's impossible," Carol said. Her voice sounded smaller now, less confident. I clicked another entry. A video thumbnail appeared. A hallway, a living room, family photos on the wall. The second Carol saw it, her face went completely white. "That's my house." Nobody said a word. I remember looking at her and realizing she was more scared than I'd ever seen her. The woman who had called the police on me suddenly looked like she wanted to disappear. Sergeant Brooks immediately grabbed his radio. Within minutes, he was requesting cybercrime support. What had started as a suspicious person call had become something entirely different. While we waited, I kept digging. I wasn't a hacker. Far from it. But I understood networks well enough to follow a trail. Data always leaves footprints if you know where to look. The question was whether whoever did this had been smart enough to cover theirs. For the next 30 minutes, I sat at my dining room table with two officers watching over my shoulder while Carol paced nervously near the window. Every new discovery made things worse. Whoever was behind this operation had built a fake wireless access point designed to mimic legitimate networks. People thought they were connecting to a safe signal. Instead, they were handing over access to their devices. Cameras, passwords, data, private information, entire digital lives. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. Not just because I'd been affected, but because I knew these people. Kids played in these homes. Families trusted those security systems. Someone had violated that trust simply because they could. Eventually, I found something useful. A destination address. Then another. Then a pattern. Data wasn't being routed across the country. It wasn't disappearing overseas. It wasn't bouncing through anonymous servers. It was staying local. Very local. I cross-referenced timestamps, signal strengths, and connection histories. The answer narrowed rapidly. House by house. Block by block. The neighborhood suddenly felt much smaller. Jenna leaned forward. Can you pinpoint it? Maybe. I kept working. 10 more minutes passed. Then 5. Then suddenly everything lined up. I stared at the screen. My chest tightened. You've got to be kidding me. Brooks immediately noticed. You found something? I turned the laptop around. I found an address. Carol stepped closer. Whose? I hesitated. For a moment, I honestly hoped I was wrong. Then I checked the data again. Same result. Same location. Same source. It's coming from Oak Ridge Lane. Carol frowned. That's only 3 houses away. I nodded. Yeah. Which house? She asked. I looked directly at her. The color drained from her face before I even spoke. Maybe because she had already figured it out. Maybe because somewhere deep down she'd been putting pieces together before the rest of us. Number 214. Silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Carol slowly lowered herself into a chair. No, she whispered. No, that's impossible. Unfortunately, it wasn't impossible. Number 214 belonged to her nephew, Tyler Whitaker. 22 years old. Computer science student. Quiet. Smart. Kept mostly to himself. Moved in with Carol 6 months earlier after transferring schools. I remembered seeing him occasionally. Headphones on. Eyes on a laptop. Polite enough. Invisible most of the time. The kind of kid nobody paid much attention to. Which suddenly felt very important. Brooks looked at Carol carefully. You know him better than anyone. Is there anything we should know? Carol stared at the floor. He's always on his computer. Nobody said anything. He's up all night sometimes. Still silence. Then she whispered something that made the room feel colder. A few months ago, I asked why he needed so many monitors. Brooks and Jenna exchanged a glance. The kind professionals exchange when a theory starts becoming a reality. Within minutes, we were walking toward 214 Oak Ridge Lane. Carol looked like she might be sick. The officers stayed focused. As for me, I couldn't stop thinking about the irony. A woman had called the police because she thought I was dangerous. Now we were following evidence that pointed directly to someone living inside her own house. As we approached the front door, Brooks turned toward me. Stay behind us. I nodded. My heart was pounding. Not because I was afraid. Because I needed to know. I needed to know whether the answer we'd found was real. Whether months of spying, stolen privacy, and hidden surveillance really led to the quiet college kid everyone had overlooked. A few seconds later, Sergeant Brooks knocked on the door, and what happened after Tyler opened it would shock every single person standing on that porch. The door opened just a few inches at first. Tyler Whitaker stood there wearing a faded college sweatshirt, one hand still on the knob, his eyes moving from Sergeant Brooks to Officer Mills, and then finally to his aunt. For a brief second, he looked confused. Then he saw my face behind them. That confusion vanished. I still remember that moment because it was the first time all day I saw someone who knew exactly what was happening before a single word was spoken. Tyler, Carol said softly. The police need to talk to you. He swallowed. About what? Brooks didn't answer immediately. He simply studied him. Years of police work had probably taught him to recognize fear when he saw it. Mind if we come in? Tyler hesitated just a little too long. Do you have a warrant? The question landed like a brick. Nobody had accused him yet. Nobody had even explained why we were there. Yet somehow the first thing he wanted to know was whether the police had legal authority to search his home. Brooks noticed it too. Not at the moment, he said calmly. We're hoping to clear up a few questions. Tyler's eyes flickered toward the staircase behind him. Just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Jenna saw it. Brooks saw it. I saw it. And judging by the look on Carol's face, she saw it too. The silence stretched. Finally, Tyler stepped back. Fine. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels manufactured. We entered the living room and immediately noticed multiple networking devices sitting on a side table. Routers. Signal boosters. Equipment most people wouldn't even recognize. Tyler noticed us looking. I study cybersecurity, he said quickly. That's normal. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Brooks asked if he had a computer upstairs. Tyler nodded. For school. Mind showing us. Another pause. Another hesitation. Another answer that came too late. Sure. The second we stepped into that bedroom, the entire atmosphere changed. For monitors, custom-built desktop, storage drives stacked beside the desk, networking hardware everywhere. None of it was illegal by itself. But then Tyler made a mistake. A huge one. While Brooks was speaking, Tyler glanced toward the screen. Instinctively, like someone checking whether a door had been left open. Brooks followed his eyes. So did Jenna. On one monitor, visible for barely a second before Tyler tried to minimize the window, was a grid of video feeds. Homes, driveways, front porches, living rooms. My blood ran cold. Nobody spoke. Tyler froze. Brooks stepped forward slowly. Don't touch the keyboard. Tyler's face went completely white. Carol made a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't crying. It was the sound of someone's reality breaking apart. Tyler, she whispered. Tell me that's not what it looks like. He couldn't, because it was exactly what it looked like. Within an hour, detectives from the cybercrime unit arrived with a warrant. They seized computers, drives, networking equipment, and enough digital evidence to fill multiple evidence boxes. The deeper they looked, the worse it became. Tyler hadn't simply accessed a few cameras. He had spent months building fake network access points around the neighborhood. Families unknowingly connected to them. Devices became compromised. Security systems became vulnerable. Private camera feeds became entertainment. What started as curiosity had slowly turned into obsession. An obsession had turned into a crime. The strangest part was that Tyler never looked like a movie villain. He wasn't some criminal mastermind hiding in shadows. He was just a young guy who kept making one bad decision after another until he crossed a line he couldn't uncross. As officers led him outside in handcuffs, neighbors gathered at windows and front porches. Nobody could believe it. The quiet college kid. The polite nephew. The one nobody ever worried about. Carol stood near the walkway with tears running down her face. Tyler tried to say something to her before getting into the patrol vehicle, but she couldn't even look at him. Then Sergeant Brooks walked over to me. You realize if you hadn't changed that password today, we might never have found this. I looked at the patrol car pulling away. Funny thing is, I said, I wasn't trying to catch anybody. I was just trying to fix my internet. Brooks laughed. Sometimes that's all it takes. Then Carol slowly approached me. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely embarrassed. Not defensive, not argumentative, just embarrassed. Marcus, she said quietly, I owe you an apology. I looked across the street at her house. The same house where she'd spent years watching everyone else. The same house where the real problem had been sitting right under her nose. Maybe, I said. She lowered her eyes. I judged you. Yeah, I assumed the worst. Yeah, her voice cracked, and I was completely wrong. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I shrugged. The truth is, Carol, you weren't looking for facts. You were looking for someone to blame. She nodded because she knew it was true. I guess I was. I started walking back toward my house. Halfway across the lawn, I stopped and looked back. You know what's crazy? She waited. This morning, I was the suspicious guy standing in his driveway. By dinner, it turned out I was the only person paying attention. I left her standing there without waiting for a response. Over the following months, life slowly returned to normal. The neighborhood became quieter. People upgraded their security. Conversations changed. And strangely enough, Carol and I eventually became friends. Not close friends, but real ones. Sometimes all it takes is a disaster to force people to see each other clearly. Even now, years later, the lesson still sticks with me. Most people think danger looks obvious. They think it announces itself. They think it lives somewhere far away. But sometimes the person you suspect is completely innocent, and the person you trust without question is the one you should have been paying attention to all along. So here's what I want to know from you. Was Carol's call to 911 completely wrong? Or did her mistake accidentally uncover a criminal who might have continued spying on families for years? Did she deserve forgiveness after falsely accusing an innocent neighbor, or would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments because honestly, even after everything that happened, I'm still not completely sure where I stand on that question. And if you've ever experienced a situation where assumptions turned out to be completely wrong, share your story below. I'd love to read it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened right next door.